Joining me on stage are two very good friends and partners for the work that the ERLC does. One is the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti, and the other is Ryan Bangert, Senior Vice President for Alliance Defending Freedom. Will you welcome them to the stage? General, I have to say, between you and Dr. Davis, there's a distinct Tennessee flavor to this event, which makes me feel like I'm back at home. All right, so we mentioned that Thursday is an opinion release day. I just got to know. One of my teammates actually said this the other day. There is a case that bears your name before our nation's highest court, and 50 years from now, they're going to be teaching this to 1Ls and 3Ls in law school about this case, and they're going to be saying your name. How does that feel right now?
It's super weird. I mean, when I was a young lawyer, I dreamed of maybe arguing a case in the Supreme Court. I never thought I'd be the defendant in one. I was pretty abruptly made the Attorney General in Tennessee. We have an appointed position. In Texas, you have to work years and campaign and raise money and put a lot of effort in. I tried to talk someone else into being the Attorney General of Tennessee and failed, and had the job kind of fall in my lap. And this all happened really quick. When I was at the Supreme Court for the case, I had to be sworn into the Supreme Court bar. I had never done that. And so I walk up there and I take the oath, and the Chief Justice kind of giggled when I got sworn in. And I think it's because rarely does the defendant show up to get sworn into the bar. And then I went right from being sworn in to sitting at the table. And, I think my feelings on it depend in large part on how the case turns out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a highly consequential case. It's going to affect. I mean, I guess we have to allow it may be a really narrow decision. I don't think so. Assuming it's not, it stands to affect millions upon millions of families, certainly in Tennessee and beyond. Southern Baptists have certainly spoken strongly to this issue, and that's why we put a brief before the court. Ryan, I'm curious. ADF, well, first of all, Alliance Defending Freedom is the premier legal advocacy organization in the Christian world. And so they do this routinely. But I'm curious, give us a little peek behind the curtain. In the run-up to the second half of June, when the major decisions come out from our nation's Supreme Court, what's it like at ADF? How are y'all preparing and steeling yourselves for what is to come?
Thank you, Brent. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you, and so grateful for the support of ERLC in this important endeavor, and of course the incredible leadership of my friend, Attorney General Skrmetti, and just courageously taking this issue on. But this is a fight that has been taking place, as many of you know, for years and years and years now. And this scourge of gender ideology has affected not just our medical industry, but it's affected everything from our educational industry to foster and adoption care. It's had a direct and profound impact upon religious liberty. Of course, we all have been seeing what's done to sports, to female sports. So this is an issue that cuts across many different areas of our society right now. And I think the one that the Supreme Court decided to take, the Skrmetti case, really hits home on the most salient and obvious place where gender ideology cashes out in a negative way, and that is directly injuring and damaging our children. And so from that perspective, the stakes in this case couldn't be any higher. And as we're moving forward, I mean, this is really the result. This is not just, this case didn't just spring out of nowhere. This was the result of years and years of effort of laying the groundwork to make the legal arguments. Tennessee, of course, was the case that ended up at the Supreme Court, but there are several other states. 26 states have laws just like Tennessee's, and many of them are under attack right now from the left. The Biden administration, incredibly enough, joined that assault on the dignity of children. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is really a pivotal moment in this fight for sanity and for reality in this space. So, I mean, I think, like I said, the stakes couldn't be higher. And so we are waiting pins and needles to see what the court does.
Okay, so even grizzled veterans like yourselves, you get on pins and needles. Like, Kristen Wagner, who's who's the head of ADF. I think she might be the strongest woman in Washington, D.C. So it's good to know that even y'all get a little case of the nerves. A few months ago, I was in West Tennessee, and I met with Dub Oliver, Dr. Dub Oliver. He's the president of Union University. And he said, towards the end of the spring semester, I would love to do an event with Tennessee's Attorney General. Do you happen to know him? And I was like, I know Jonathan, absolutely. I'd love to be there for it. And so we had the opportunity to have a conversation, not just about the case itself, because I really want you to get to know this man. Jonathan and I, we see each other around town in Nashville, and we have some dear friends each year that have a Christmas party. So our families always get together then. And so I just wanted you to get a real sense of who he is. So Jonathan, you're a faithful believer, and I admire you for that, because I think in so much of what you do in the position that God has allowed you to come to, I see biblical truth coming out in your work. And so I'm just curious, can you tell our friends here, what it is about your faith that motivates you to do this work? Because it's very stressful work. It's very important work. And I always see you returning back to your faith.
So, I started my legal career as a prosecutor, and I loved the public service of it. I loved the sacrificial nature of it. I loved the ability to do good in the world, to shine light into the lives of people who had been really hurt. And I went into private practice for a while of financial necessity, and I had a really hard time with that. Just some people are able to stay motivated in business circumstances. Some people have a harder time with the lack of a really missional sense of the job. I had a hard time. I was praying, God, either give me contentment or open a door. And I got cold called by the prior Attorney General of Tennessee to come work for him, and took the job. Then the governor wanted to hire me, took that job. Then I was appointed Attorney General. And it all happened very quickly over the course of just a few years. And it should never have happened. I mean, I moved to Tennessee 13 years ago, thinking I was going to be a career prosecutor in Memphis. And so the fact that I've been sort of thrown into this situation is incredibly humbling. And, we're doing Esther and VBS right now. And, sometimes it's such a time as this. And I'm in the middle of things that are so much bigger than I have any business being in the middle of, but I'm there for a reason. And so I just try to remember it's not about me, and that, God puts people where he needs them, where he wants them. And that's not something that should be taken lightly. It's not something that should be taken as an indication that I'm any better than anybody else. But I'm here and I have a job to do, and I'm going to do it as best I can.
That's so good. Ryan, give our group a sense of how scriptural principles shape the mission of ADF. I told them, I really do think that y'all are the finest legal organization in the Christian world, but why is that the case?
That's a great question. ADF exists to advance the God-given right to live and speak the truth, so that all may be free from the bondage of sin, the bondage of lies, and free to serve God, free to fulfill their purpose in God's economy. And so we are absolutely grounded on those scriptural truths. And we've been talking a lot as a leadership team about the moment that we're in, and we've been turning increasingly to Acts 4 and the story of the apostles in the upper room, and really focusing on not just the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, but also the courage that it took to stand in that time. I think we often forget about what it was like for the apostles at that time. They lived in a secular culture. They were surrounded not just by a Roman culture, but also by a Jewish culture that had just crucified Christ. So, you could not imagine a more hostile environment, ideologically, spiritually, in every single way. And yet there they were, speaking the truth with all boldness. And again, the scriptures say that the apostles spoke the truth with boldness as the Holy Spirit gave them utterance. And at ADF, the whole reason we exist is so that the church, so that believers can fulfill that historic mission to speak the truth with all boldness as the Holy Spirit gives utterance. And I think that's exactly tied to the case we're talking about today, because what could be more true than the fact that God created them male and female? In his image, he created them male and female. If we're rejecting the core concept of the Imago Dei, which is what this case is about, then that's a direct attack on biblical truth. And so that, I think the stakes, like I said, the stakes in this case are very high.
Yeah. Let's stay with you, Ryan, on that point. So when you're not actually a party to a case at ADF, y'all are in the same position that the ERLC traditionally is in. You're amici. You file friends of the court brief. What's the importance of that? Just kind of technically, why is it important to have multiple parties and multiple voices speaking to a case?
Certainly. Well, for one reason, the Supreme Court imposes page limits on the briefing, as the Attorney General Skrmetti knows. And you often can't get all the good arguments out in that small amount of space that you're given in the brief. And so amici can bring to the court perspectives and can fully develop arguments that otherwise would be given short shrift or not be included at all in the party's brief, because there are certain things you just have to hit as a matter of course. And so amici can bring to the court important perspectives, can develop entire themes of argument and thought that otherwise would be completely missing from the case. So it's a very, very important service. In fact, amicus curiae means friend of the court. You're providing the court with a perspective that it otherwise might not get because of the page limitations and because of the space limitations that are necessarily imposed on the parties.
Jonathan, pick up from that just a little bit. Why was it important for the ERLC and the Tennessee Baptists to come together and file a brief in this case?
So first of all, we are incredibly grateful in Tennessee for that support. It's important for two reasons. The first is we are only able to make so many arguments given the time limits. You have to be extraordinarily strategic about every word that goes into a brief. Our brief went through 150 drafts before it was done, just constantly being refined to be as effective as possible. And that means there's a lot left out. There are a lot of arguments that either can't be fully included or have to be just hinted at. And so having the opportunity in a very significant case for the court to get the most robust argumentation possible matters. The other thing is, we're the state of Tennessee. There's an establishment clause, and so we are not able to make some arguments that are really important to people. This is a case that is a very significant equal protection clause case. It's also a very significant case from a theological perspective. We can't make the theological arguments as the state of Tennessee, but that's something that matters an immense amount to a lot of people. And so the amicus briefs allow a broad spectrum of people to express both why the case should come out a certain way, but also why it matters to them. And having an engaged entity like the ERLC, which I think is a particularly important voice for a large number of Americans, gives the court that perspective, lets those arguments be aired out, and allows the state of Tennessee to continue to be a pluralistic state, while at the same time making sure the court is exposed to some less pluralistic reasons for why this is a particularly significant case.
Yeah, and I don't want y'all to miss this. I did say this during the first brief. Really, for the first time, we devoted real resources, and particularly for this case, to identifying a Southern Baptist attorney, a legal scholar who could present a constitutional argument before the court, and then inviting the Tennessee Baptists on. Traditionally, we'll be a part of a coalition, and we still do those. But I told the team I really want to devote actual money to identifying an attorney that will represent our views, consistent with Scripture, Baptist faith and message, resolutions on this particular issue. And ADF generally, when we do the coalition stuff, they help us link up with folks to make those arguments. But on this one, we went out, and also on the Paxton case, we went out to make sure that this was going to be a distinctively Baptist brief before the justices. And so I'm really thankful. You mentioned y'all had 150. I don't know that we had that many drafts for our brief, although I think our attorney was like, you're getting quite a few here on the mark. But anyway, so we're really proud of that, and we want to continue doing that. Jonathan, can you give a sense, what started this case? Like, what was behind it to make the law be drafted, passed, and like what was the genesis of this?
So I think the genesis of this was reporting that there were gender transition procedures being done on kids at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville.
Correct.
And our legislators immediately got very concerned about that. This case in Tennessee was originally known as the SB1 case because the bill that passed was SB1 HB1. It was the first bill introduced in each house. It was introduced by the majority leaders, Jack Johnson in the Senate, William Lamberth in the House, and they thought this was extremely important. It was a bipartisan supermajority that ultimately passed the law. They had hearings. They considered the evidence very carefully, and they decided that in Tennessee, kids should not be subjected to this because the evidence of positive outcomes was extremely limited. The evidence of negative outcomes was pretty significant. And despite sort of a medical/legal consensus that gender transition treatments are the appropriate course for kids who are having gender confusion issues, if you actually look at the research, the overwhelming majority of kids who have any sort of gender confusion grow out of it unless they're put on these treatments. And we were seeing countries in Europe, which are not Southern Baptist countries, right? I mean, like, people say, oh, this is just conservative propaganda. I promise you, the Scandinavian countries are not particularly susceptible to conservative propaganda, but the United Kingdom, Sweden, Norway, they were all looking at the evidence and they had embraced these treatments and they started pulling back saying, this is hurting kids. Now, gender dysphoria is a really serious problem. It is a heavy, heavy burden for people to bear. And there have always been people with gender dysphoria, and we should be compassionate toward them. We should be sympathetic toward them. It is a tough thing to deal with in life, and it should not be made light of. We have seen an explosion in the number of people who are claiming gender identity issues. There was a researcher in England who said there was a 4,000% increase over a 10-year period in the number of young girls who are looking for medical treatment for gender identity issues. And nobody knows why. It's inexplicable. It's a massive change. And these procedures, more and more, are understood to have lifelong consequences, not just the potential loss of fertility or the guaranteed loss of fertility, depending on what procedure we're talking about, but there are bone density issues that can never be fixed. There are cognitive developmental issues that can never be fixed. And kids can't give informed consent. When you're saying, well, you might lose the ability to have children, well, you might lose the ability to have intimacy, you can't expect a 13 or a 14-year-old to understand what they're giving up. And so it's really important where you have this massive increase in numbers, where you have these new treatments that aren't supported by evidence, where you have evidence that the evidence that is out there has been deliberately doctored to show that this stuff has a positive outcome when it doesn't. I mean, we know for a fact that there was political manipulation of the research that was being done here in a variety of ways. It's all on record. Alabama, Steve Marshall, the AG there, uncovered a trove of documents showing the administration and activist lawyers telling the scientists what to write in what was the gold standard for medical treatment for kids with transgender issues. These are times when a government needs to step in. So the legislature thought this is a really important issue where we have to protect kids from this unchecked momentum of an unproven approach.
Ryan, as you mentioned other states that have laws just like this. So it's a majority of states that have this. I'm curious, as y'all are watching this case and you saw the oral arguments and then you see the feedback and the ways that it's talked about out in the public square, are there any sort of misunderstandings, misinformation about this case that you think are helpful for us to know as we think through it and talk to our neighbors about it?
Yes, misinformation always. I think in the words of the great poet and philosopher Taylor Swift, why you got to be so mean? I mean, that, people keep asking that. Are we just being mean here? And I think Jonathan really hit that nail on the head when you look at the science. So interestingly, the case that the Supreme Court is considering right now doesn't delve into the science. The question the court is asking is this, and this is going to sound kind of nerdy: do we apply rational basis review or intermediate scrutiny review to this law? What does that mean? It means, are we going to allow the state to articulate a rationale for this law and go with it, or are we, the court, going to really dig in and force the state in a really rigorous way to justify what it's doing? And the way the court's going to decide that is whether or not this constitutes what they call sex discrimination or lack of equal protection under the Constitution. And I think we have very good arguments for why it's not. And I think those arguments are absolutely ironclad. But the misimpression I think that people get is, well, this is just sort of sour grapes, curmudgeonly conservatives taking away necessary treatment for youth who are struggling. And I think what Jonathan said is exactly right. Gender dysphoria is a real thing. There are thousands of youth in America today struggling with this painful situation. A lot of it, I think, is being brought on by our saturated social media culture. And there's a lot of science that's gone into that. But the struggle and the pain is real. And the question is, well, how do we deal with that in a way that's compassionate and biblical? And certainly as believers at ADF and at ERLC, we believe that the best way to help people is to point them back to the truth of God's design for who they are. That is compassion, that is truth. And the science, this is a beautiful thing, the science backs up the biblical story. God created us male and female. You can't change that. And when you try to use medical interventions to change that, increasingly what the science says in increasingly louder ways is that causes lifelong psychological, physiological, and relational damage. Irreversible, in the words of Abigail Schreier, who is not a believer, by the way, irreversible damage to these children. And so the compassionate thing here is to do exactly what the law in Tennessee did, which is to let the state protect children from a medical industry that has decided to take advantage of their vulnerability in the name of profits and ideology.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I would just echo, like, this is all about protecting kids. We are in the middle of a massive information / ideological / theological era that is very confusing and very fast-moving and very complicated. But these are kids that we're talking about who don't understand the context that they're in, who don't understand the choices that they're being asked to make. And in a situation like that, where there's a lot of uncertainty, where there's a huge amount of risk to children, the government absolutely has a job to do to protect the kids. And I think every indication that we're seeing medically here in Europe as people start doing actual evidence-based medicine is 30 years from now, there's going to be a lot of regret. We're going to see documentaries about, the sad stories of people who were pushed in this direction, who didn't fully understand it, and who carry those consequences for the rest of their lives. There was unbelievable opposition here. I mean, not just from the medical industry, the American Medical Association and a bunch of other ancillary specialty groups weighed in very heavily. The American Bar Association weighed in. Corporate America has been very vocal about this. Hollywood has been very vocal about this. There's been a huge cultural push to say, you're just being mean, you need to let these kids do what they want to do. Gender affirming care is such a well-coined term. It sounds so warm and fuzzy, but what you're talking about is this lifelong alteration of their bodies that kids just cannot appreciate. There's no research that shows that it makes sense. There's a lot of research showing it's dangerous. And so as the cultural tide really kind of raged at its high water mark, I think the Tennessee legislature and the governor took a lot of heat for this, but they were very brave and they said, we need to take action to protect our kids. And it's been a privilege representing the state through this litigation.
I would add to that, adroit followers of the Southern Baptist Convention, which, that's y'all, right? Adroit followers of the Southern Baptist Convention will note that in recent years, we have staked out ground protecting parental rights. And some folks might fall into a trap and say, but we're for parental rights. Isn't that coming into conflict with what we're saying here? And I would appeal to y'all to say, well, look at what Romans 13 says. And we know that our Lord ordains the government to restrain evil and to do good. And so here we have instances where even parents are caught in this trap where they're thinking they need to take their kids to these clinics and have these radical, as you just said, life-changing, life-harming surgeries that are done to them and procedures that are done on them. And so we do believe it is appropriate, and that's part of what the argument that we made in our brief on behalf of the Southern Baptist Convention. We made that argument that, in fact, we feel it is appropriate for the state to intervene in those instances because children are being harmed. Their lives are being harmed. And there's an echo there with other arguments we make in another area, the sanctity of life. And so that's how all of this works together. So, knowing the stakes of this case, General Skrmetti, I'm curious, what does it mean to have your name on this case? Like, do you feel the weight of it?
I mean, it's kind of awkward, honestly, because it's hard to talk about, because it sounds really narcissistic to say, oh, the Skrmetti case, the most important case at the court this term, and oh, it's this landmark case. I mean, it sounds really obnoxious. The other thing is I have relatives who are on both sides of the political spectrum. On one side of the family, we are by far the most conservative people in the family. On the other side of the family, we're pretty close to the most liberal in the family. And I have some very enthusiastic relatives on both sides of it. And it's a little weird to be in the middle of it. And, a lot of people worked on this. I do not pass laws. I litigate, and I'm still kind of surprised I was the defendant in this case. But I'm not litigating on behalf of me. This is the state of Tennessee making a very well-reasoned determination that this is an important law despite all of the pushback and obstacles. And so it's a huge privilege to get to be the point of the spear of this. It was incredible to get to sit at the table in the Supreme Court for what is probably one of the most significant equal protection cases, certainly of the decade, maybe of my lifetime. And it's why people go to law school. I mean, you don't want to go to law school and do nothing with that degree. You go there because you want to make the world a better place. And I feel incredibly blessed to be in a position to lead the team fighting this fight.
That's so good. Ryan, I know you can't forecast exactly what our justices are going to do. Who can? But just generally, can you tell, the vast majority of our folks here, they're pastors, they're ministry leaders in the local church. How will this decision, if it comes down, either in the way that we're praying that it will, or maybe even against us, just paint a little bit, what effect will that have on our churches?
That's a great question. I want to start off by saying I'm going to lobby for them to put a pronunciation guide in the textbooks so they can all get the name of the case right. But in terms of how it's going to affect you, you may be saying, well, look, maybe we don't have any or maybe very few people in our congregations, minors, who are struggling with this. Maybe this is a one-off situation. But this ideology, gender ideology, is embedded in a broader political movement that I would argue is anti-free speech and even in some ways authoritarian. And what do I mean by that? Well, look at when you speak a lie, and it's an obvious lie, men can become women, women can become men. The only way to back that up is by silencing critique. And that's exactly what we have seen all across the country from this movement. We've seen schools pass rules that force teachers to use whatever pronoun their students choose. We've seen states pass laws preventing Christian families, including pastors, from adopting children if they won't pay fealty to gender ideology and say, we will go ahead and we'll honor whatever gender identity these kids may have. We've seen a number of states, of course, the women's sports issue, but we've seen a number of states that have gone right at churches directly. And I'm thinking about Michigan, I'm thinking about Colorado, I'm thinking about the state of Washington, who have interpreted their anti-discrimination laws to say that, hey, church, if you have a hiring policy that prevents you from hiring someone who disagrees with your Orthodox Christian belief about gender identity, you're breaking the law. And we have cases right now in court contesting those kinds of laws. And so, yes, this case is very important for the health, safety of the children involved, but it's also very important in the broader scheme of things because this is part of a broader ideology that is authoritarian and totalitarian in its wake. And I want to draw really quickly to something that our previous speaker said. Think about what's coming down the pike because this gender identity movement is really transhumanist in its nature. It's a movement that denies the imago Dei. And we are seeing right now medical science. There was a Wall Street Journal article that came out. There's a new company now that offers a genetic test on IVF embryos.
Yep.
And they will test the embryos up to 20 at a time for 900 different conditions. And they will even test them for eye color, height, and IQ. They say we need to engineer the future of the human race. This is a profound denial of the imago Dei. And so I think this case is important not just for the issues we're facing today, but for the issues we're going to face. We're actually facing that today, but we're going to face in 5 years. So I think this is really important for all those reasons.
So this is our final question. I'm going to start with you, Ryan, so we can give the general the last word. What are ways that we can be thinking about this case before it comes out and really praying for it, for ADF, and then I'll turn it to you, General Skrmetti.
Well, I am the vine, you are the branch. I mean, he is the vine, and we're the branches. Right? We can do nothing, but that's the theme verse of ADF. I think that should be the theme verse for all of our lives. Prayer is really the way that we come to the throne of God and make our petition known to Him, and He ultimately holds the outcome in His hand. He is not going to be surprised by whatever the Supreme Court does, and we can rest in that. But I would just be ready to have good conversations with your congregants, good conversations with your fellow church members about what this case means, not just from a legal perspective, but from a broader cultural perspective, how we properly care for the people who are afflicted by the scourge of gender ideology. I would be ready to have that conversation. Hey, you know what? This law's been upheld. God willing, this law's been upheld. What do we do now? What's the next step? How do we show Christ's love and compassion to a hurting generation who desperately needs to hear His truth?
Yeah, and I should point out, this is a little bit of a homecoming for Ryan because he's coming back to Dallas. He went to Prestonwood when he was here, so we're grateful to make that opportunity for you. And so, Jonathan, same question to you. As we lead up to this moment, how can we be praying for you, your teammates in your office that represented not just the state of Tennessee? I mean, I'm obviously proud of that, but you represented so many millions of people who are so deeply concerned about this issue. And so how can we be praying for you? And in particular, the inevitable, the world we live in, particularly in a prominent position like this, the attacks that will come. How can we be praying for your family and for you in this moment?
Well, thank you for asking. Prayers for safety, of course. If we win this case, there are going to be some very, very unhappy people out there. And hopefully there aren't any serious security concerns, but I'm worried about that as a husband and dad. Pray for my team that, all of us, if we win gracefully in a way that reinforces both shining God's light into the world and also reinforces the democracy that we live in. Romans 13 in a participatory democracy is kind of an interesting riddle as to exactly what we're called to do, but I think we need to reinforce the legitimacy of the institutions of our government to do our Christian duty. And so I hope that win or lose, we are able to do that, and that people are able to participate fully in airing the values that matter to them and putting them into action through political activity, not necessarily organized through the church, but each one of us as an individual voter has a right to have a voice. And if things matter to us, we need to make sure that we are acting on that. The idea of a pluralistic America doesn't mean that every individual member of American society needs to check their religion at the door when they participate in politics. And so even if we do have a First Amendment that prohibits the establishment of a religion on behalf of the state, it doesn't mean that people who care deeply about their religious commitments can't bring those cares into the ballot box, can't voice their concerns in ways that articulate their faith as well as their economic concerns. And so, at the heart, this case is really about whether the people's elected representatives or the courts are going to be the ones who decide on whether this policy goes into effect or not. Regardless of how it comes out, though, we live in a country where the people are the ultimate source of authority for our government. And of course, we know that our government is a passing thing, that we live in a world where God is the ultimate source of authority. But while we are here on this earth in these bodies, we have a responsibility, as Romans 13 sets out, to be good citizens. And so this is something that matters a lot to a lot of people. I suspect you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't care a lot about these issues, unless you thought Ellen Skrmetti was going to be here and wanted a comedy show. You got the boring Skrmetti, I'm sorry. But no, I mean, this is important stuff, and we need to stay engaged because there are more issues coming down the line. This is a very relatively narrow legal argument, but there's a whole ontological question. I mean, when you talk about women in sports and men playing in women's sports, people on the other side will say, well, there are no men playing in women's sports. There are women who were assigned male at birth who are playing in women's sports. And there's this whole idea of what it means to be a man and a woman, that this is just the first constitutional case to get to the court. But there's a whole lot of philosophy and a whole lot of political activism that have been pushing us to this point. And if people care about these issues, they need to stay engaged and give voice. And the ERLC has been a very effective voice on behalf of the Southern Baptist Convention in these issues, and I very much appreciate that. And I really appreciate the chance to be here and talk with all of you.
That's so good. Hey, Ryan, we're thankful for you. We're thankful for the team at ADF and all that you do. And Jonathan, I'm just so thankful for you. I'm so thankful that you have been obedient to the call in your life to be in this position and do the advocacy and the hard and legal work that you do. They're going to be around for a little bit after this lunch. Come say hello to them. And who knows, you might be shaking the hand of a future Supreme Court justice. I truly do think that General Skrmetti is one of the top legal minds in our nation, and we are so blessed to have him in Tennessee. Would y'all say thank you with a round of applause?